The knock came hard and fast, 3 sharp bangs like someone was using the last of everything they had just to make the sound. Nadia was already halfway across the room before Rose could say a word. Nadia, Rose started, her voice low and careful, the kind of voice she used when she meant wait. But Nadia's hand was already on the latch. She pulled the door open and the night came rushing in, cold, wet, smelling of rain and something else, something small and frightened. And there he was, a boy, 5 years old, maybe 6 at the most, standing on the front step of their little terraced house on Kestrel Lane in the quiet neighborhood of Elmfield, soaked straight through to the skin. His shoes were dark with water. His bottom lip was trembling in that specific way that children's lips tremble when they have been holding the crying in for a very long time and cannot hold it anymore. His eyes, wide and dark and searching, went straight to Nadia's face, and he did not look away. "I got lost," he said. That was all. 3 words, and then the lips stopped trembling and gave way entirely, and the crying came. Nadia did not hesitate. She crouched right down to his level, right there in the open doorway with the rain blowing in sideways behind him, and she looked at him the way she always looked at things that needed looking at properly, straight on, without flinching. "Okay," she said. "Okay, come inside." Nadia, Rose's voice was sharper now, and she had moved from the kitchen and was standing 3 paces back, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were not unkind, but they were careful. Rose's eyes were always careful. "Gran, look at him." Nadia said it simply, not as an argument, just as a fact. "Look at him." Rose looked, and even Rose, who had lived long enough to know that an open door was not always a safe door, who had learned that lesson more than once and paid for the learning in ways she did not talk about. Even Rose felt something shift under her ribs when she looked at that small, drenched, shaking boy on the step. She stepped back and made room. "Kitchen," she said. "Shoes off first. And close that door behind you." His name was Theo. Theo Harland. He told them this in small pieces, the way frightened children give out information, a little at a time, checking each time that it was safe to give more. He was 5. He had been at Crestfield Park with his father. They had been playing near the fountain, the one with the ducks on it, he said, which Nadia immediately knew, because she had sat on the edge of that fountain more times than she could count. And then his father's phone had rung, and Theo had walked a little further along the path, just to look at something, just for a second, and when he turned around his father wasn't where he had been. "And then I walked and walked," Theo said, "but I couldn't find the fountain again. And my phone died." He held up the phone as evidence. A sleek, expensive thing, its screen black and blank. "Do you know your dad's number?" Nadia asked. Theo shook his head miserably. "It's on my phone. And your address?" Another head shake. "I know it is Gates," he offered. Nadia glanced at Rose. Rose was already at the stove, and she did not glance back, but the set of her shoulders said something. It said, "This is going to take longer than 5 minutes." Rose put a pot of soup on. She did it without announcing it, without making a performance of it. She simply took the pot from the shelf, ladled in what was left from dinner, and set it over the flame. Nadia found a charger that fit the boy's phone and plugged it into the wall socket near the kitchen table. Theo watched both of these things happening around him with an expression of exhausted, trembling wonder, as though he had not quite believed that anything good was still going to happen tonight, and now he was not quite sure he trusted it yet. "Sit," Rose told him, pulling out a chair. Her voice was still firm, but the firmness had changed its quality. It was no longer the firmness of a door staying closed. It was the firmness of something steady to hold on to. Theo sat. The soup arrived in a bowl that was slightly too big for him. He wrapped both hands around it the way a much smaller child would, and he breathed in the steam, and for the first time since the door had opened, the shaking in his shoulders began to slow. "This smells like my grandma's house," he said quietly. Rose said nothing, but she turned from the counter just slightly, and Nadia saw, only because she was watching, and she was always watching, that Rose's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, but was close to one. Very close. "What's your grandma's house like?" Nadia asked, settling into the chair across from him, pulling her knees up the way she always did, chin resting on top. Theo thought about it with full, serious concentration. "Big," he said, "but she moved. She lives somewhere warm now." She sent me pictures of birds. A pause. I miss her. I live with my gran, Nadia said, tilting her head toward Rose. She's pretty good, Rose said from the counter, without turning around. Nadia. She's excellent, Nadia corrected, and Theo, for the first time, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh but was its first cousin. They gave the phone 20 minutes to charge. 20 minutes in which Theo ate nearly all of the soup, and Nadia produced a tin of biscuit from the cupboard above the fridge, the good ones, the ones Rose kept for Sundays, and set them on the table without asking because she had judged the situation and found that it called for the good biscuits. Rose saw. She did not say anything. When Theo's phone finally blinked on, he stared at it with an intensity that was almost painful to watch. He touched the screen with one careful finger. Then his face crumpled again, very suddenly, like paper. There's so many missed calls, he whispered. Nadia leaned over to look. There were 43. 43 missed calls from a contact saved as Dad. Call him back, Nadia said gently. Theo looked at her, as though asking for permission he shouldn't have needed. Then he pressed the name. The phone rang once. Just once. The voice that answered was something. Even Nadia, who was 10 years old and had no framework yet for words like commanding or controlled, even she heard it and went still. It was the voice of a man who was used to rooms going quiet when he spoke. But underneath it, cracking through it like a fault line through stone, was something raw and terrified. Theo. Just the name. The whole word pressing down on itself. Daddy. And Theo's voice came out so small, so genuinely small, that Nadia felt something squeeze tight behind her sternum. Where are you? Are you hurt? Who are you with? I'm okay. I'm at a house. A nice house. A girl helped me. Theo looked at Nadia while he said this. She gave him a small nod. Her name is Nadia. There was a pause on the other end. A short one, but waited. Can I speak to an adult, please? Theo held the phone out to Rose, who had come to stand at the edge of the kitchen. Rose took it with the calm of someone who had handled difficult situations before and knew that panic never shortened them. Hello, she said. This is Edward Harland. My son is with you. Not a question. A statement handed over like a credential. Can you tell me your address, please? 14 Kestrel Lane, Elmfield, Rose said. Your son is safe. He's had some soup, and he's warming up. Take your time driving. Don't rush and have an accident. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll be there in 10 minutes, the man said. Rose looked at the phone after he ended the call. Then she sat on the table next to Theo. Your father is coming, she said. Theo nodded. He picked up a second biscuit. Looked at Nadia. Is it okay if I have another one? Have two, Nadia said. He was there in 8 minutes. The car, and it was a car that Kestrel Lane had never seen before, the kind of car that looked as though it had been designed by someone who had never accepted that imperfection was a natural condition of the world, pulled up outside the house, and even through the net curtain Nadia could see that it was something else entirely. The man who stepped out of it was tall, very tall, and broad across the shoulders, and he moved with the kind of deliberate, measured speed that people move with when they are holding themselves together through pure will. He was wearing a coat that probably cost more than everything in Rose's kitchen, and he strode up the narrow front path of number 14 Kestrel Lane with the focused urgency of a man who did not often find himself in places he had not planned to be. He knocked. Rose opened the door before his hand had fully dropped. Mr. Harland. Where is he? Kitchen, Rose said and stepped aside. He was past her before the word was fully out, moving through the small hallway with those long strides. And when he came through into the kitchen and saw Theo, sitting at the table with his hands around a cup of warm milk that Nadia had produced somewhere in the last few minutes, biscuit crumbs on his chin, entirely alive, the man stopped. He stopped as though someone had cut every wire in him at once. Dad, Theo said it the same way he'd said on the phone. Small, trusting, like an answer. Edward Harland crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and crouched down, and he put his hands on either side of his son's face, and he looked at him. Just looked, checking every part of him the way you check a thing you thought was broken and cannot quite believe is still whole. You're okay, the man said. It was not a question. It was him telling himself. It was him breathing again. I ate soup, Theo confirmed. And biscuits. The good ones. Edward Harland looked up from his son's face. He looked at Rose, who was standing in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Nadia, who was still in her chair, knees up, watching everything with those steady, observant eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Both of you." His voice had changed. The commanding register had dropped away, and what was underneath, it was simpler and quieter. "I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't found you." "He found us," Nadia said. "We just opened the door." Edward looked at her for a moment. He seemed, briefly, at a loss, which Nadia suspected was not a condition he experienced often. Rose said, "He's fine. No harm done." The man straightened. He reached into the inside pocket of the impossible coat and produced an envelope. He held it out to Rose with the smooth certainty of someone performing an action they have performed many times and never had refused. "Please," he said, "for your trouble, for the food, the time, whatever seems fair, I've put more than enough in there." Rose looked at the envelope the way someone looks at a thing they have already decided about before it was offered. "We don't need that," she said. "I insist." "I know you do," Rose said, "but we don't need it." The two of them looked at each other across the small kitchen. The man was accustomed to getting the last word. That much was visible. But Rose had 30 more years of living than he did, and she had learned things about standing firm that had cost her considerably, and she was not moving an inch. The envelope went back into the coat. "Then at least, is there anything I can do? Anything at all?" "Your son is safe," Rose said. "That's enough." Theo, who had been watching this exchange with the calm, comprehensive attention of a child who misses very little, slid down from his chair. He walked to Nadia and stood in front of her, looking up. "Can I come back?" he asked. "To visit?" "You, and the soup and the biscuits." Nadia looked at Rose. Rose was looking at Edward. Edward was looking at Theo, and his expression had gone to somewhere complicated and unreachable. "That's up to your dad," Nadia said. Theo turned to his father. Edward looked at his son, this small, earnest, completely unbothered boy who had spent a terrifying hour lost in a strange neighborhood and had apparently used that time to make a friend, eat soup, and form opinions about biscuits. "We'll see," Edward said, because it was the only thing he could think of. Theo accepted this and went to retrieve his coat and his shoes and his phone with the satisfied air of someone who fully intended to follow up on the matter. Edward stood in the doorway of Rose's kitchen for one more moment. He looked around the room. The worn table, the good pot, the charger still plugged into the wall, the tin of Sunday biscuits sitting open. Something passed across his face that was too complicated to name quickly. "Mrs." he started. "Rose," she said. "Rose." He nodded slowly. "Thank you. Really." He left with his son. The car moved quietly away down Kestrel Lane. Rose closed the door. Nadia was still in her chair. "He's very tall," Nadia said. "Yes." "And his coat was very nice." "Yes." "Gran." Nadia turned to look at her. "Who is Edward Harland?" Rose looked at the closed door for a moment. Then she said, "Someone with a lot of money and a son who found our door." She went to wash up the soup bowl. It was Nadia who found out. The next morning, sitting at the kitchen table with Rose's old tablet propped against the fruit bowl, she typed the name into the search bar with one finger the way she always typed. Index finger only, very deliberately, as though each letter mattered. Edward Harland. The results came back immediately. Dozens of them. Hundreds. She read in silence for a long time. Then she said, "Gran." Rose was at the sink. "Gran," Nadia said again. "He's a billionaire." Rose turned around slowly. "Edward Harland. He owns Harland Capital. He builds things. Big things. Hotels and towers and—" Nadia squinted at the screen, something called infrastructure. She looked up. "The article says he's worth £4.2 billion. Rose dried her hands on the towel. She came to look at the screen. She read for a moment. Then she went back to the sink. "Good for him," she said. "Gran. $4.2 billion. I heard you the first time. We gave him soup. His son was cold and hungry. That's what soup is for." Nadia stared at the tablet. There was a photograph of Edward Harland on one of the results, taken at something official, something expensive looking, all glass and clean lines and people in suits. He looked different in it. In the photograph, he was composed and remote, the way people look when they have constructed a version of themselves for cameras and rooms full of strangers. The man who had walked into Rose's kitchen last night, with his eyes bright with relief and his hands on his son's face. That man was not this man. Or maybe he was underneath. Maybe the photograph was just the coat. She put the tablet down. "Do you think I'll let Theo come back?" she asked. Rose paused. "That," she said, "I genuinely don't know." He came back the next morning. Nadia answered the door and found Edward Harland on the step, without Theo this time, without the car she had spotted from the window, without the envelope. He was wearing what she supposed was his version of casual, still impeccably put together, but without the coat. In its place was something simpler, and he looked, as a result, very slightly less like a photograph of himself. "Good morning," he said. "Is your grandmother in?" "Gran," Nadia called without taking her eyes off him. Then to Edward, "She's in." Rose appeared behind Nadia. She looked at the man on the step and waited. "I wanted to come and speak to you properly," Edward said. "Yesterday I wasn't. I was relieved, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I'd like to do something for you, for your family, and I'd like to ask your permission to do it properly, rather than just handing you an envelope and walking away." Rose held his gaze for a long moment. "You'd better come in then," she said. He sat at the same kitchen table where Theo had sat the night before. Rose put on the kettle. Nadia leaned against the counter with her arms folded, which was a posture she had unconsciously borrowed from Rose over the years, and which gave her a precocious gravity that she was completely unaware of. Edward put his hands flat on the table and spoke plainly, which Rose had not expected and which earned him, in her silent accounting, a point. "I have more money than I need," he said. "That's not a boast. It's relevant context. I found out last night what your address was, and I should tell you that I know about this street, this neighborhood. I know it's been underfunded. I know the school down the road has been waiting for repairs for 2 years. And I know that none of that is your fault or your responsibility, and I know that you didn't help my son because you wanted anything from me." He stopped. Rose poured the tea. She did not fill his cup first. "I want to repair your house," he said. "Whatever needs doing. I want to cover any medical expenses your family has that aren't being covered. And I've looked into the school, the primary school on Hartwell Street where I understand Nadia is enrolled, and I would like to fund a full academic scholarship for her, including secondary school, and whatever comes after that." The kitchen was very quiet. Nadia looked at Rose. Rose was looking at Edward. "What?" Rose asked. "Because," he paused. And it was genuine, the pause. Not calculated. "Because it's the right thing. Because my son was frightened and alone, and you didn't have to open the door, and you opened it anyway. Because Nadia didn't have to sit with him and talk to him and give him her Sunday biscuits, and she did." He looked at Nadia. "Those were the good biscuits, weren't they?" Nadia said nothing, but she allowed the corner of her mouth to move. "I can't accept all of that," Rose said finally. Edward started to speak. "I can't," Rose repeated firmly. "But I'll tell you what I will accept." She set down her cup. "The roof has needed looking at for 2 years. If you want to send someone to fix the roof, you can do that. And the scholarship," she stopped. Her jaw moved. She picked up the cup again and looked into it. "The scholarship I'll accept. For Nadia." She did not look at her granddaughter while she said it, but Nadia's throat had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. "The rest," Rose said, "we manage." Edward nodded slowly. "The roof and the scholarship." "Yes." He nodded again. "Done." A pause. "Can I ask why not more?" "I'm not arguing. I'm asking." Rose looked at him directly. "Because you giving me things is easy for you. And I don't want easy things to change what happened here. What happened here was your boy was cold and frightened, and we were warm and we helped. I don't want to turn that into a transaction." Edward sat with that. He sat with it for long enough that it was clear he was actually sitting with it, not just waiting for it to finish so he could respond. "That's the clearest thing anyone has said to me in a long time," he said quietly. "You probably don't let many people talk to you clearly," Rose said. "No," he admitted. "I don't." The workers arrived 2 days later. There were 4 of them, efficient and polite, and they came with materials that were better than anything Rose would have chosen for herself. They fixed the roof. They repointed the chimney that had been worrying Rose since last winter. They repaired the garden gate, which Nadia had been lifting and angling for months to make it open and close without jamming, a workaround she had perfected and was privately a little sorry to lose. Rose stood in the garden and watched them work with her arms folded and her expression neutral. She was making sure they treated the house as a house that belonged to someone, not as a project. Making sure they did not move anything they didn't need to. Making sure that when they left, the house still felt like hers. It did. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, came to her at the end of the second day with a clipboard. "All done," he said. Mr. Harland said, "If there's anything else you notice, anything at all, just call the number at the top." Rose took the clipboard, signed where he indicated, and handed it back. "Thank you," she said. "You and your crew were very respectful." The man smiled. Mr. Harland was very particular about that. He hesitated, then, "He came by yesterday evening after you'd both gone in, just to check how things were going. He didn't knock or anything, just looked at the work from the gate." Rose absorbed this information. She said nothing. After the foreman had gone, she stood in the garden for another minute. The evening was coming in, a cool, clear evening with the particular quality of light that Nadia liked, gold and long-shadowed. From upstairs came the sound of Nadia doing something that involved music and what was probably a very ambitious amount of drawing. Rose looked at the repaired gate. She looked at the sound roof above her. She thought about a man who sent workers to be respectful and then came to check their work from the gate in the evening without knocking. She went inside and made dinner. He came back on Saturday, and this time the car did come, and Edward did get out of it, and holding his hand and walking up the now smoothly opening gate was Theo, wearing a bright yellow waterproof jacket that was clearly purchased by someone with a great deal of money who had gone into a shop and said their best one for a 5-year-old, please, and been taken at their word. Nadia was at the window. She saw them coming and went to the door before they knocked. "You came back," she said. Theo beamed. Dad said yes. Nadia looked at Edward over Theo's head. Edward's expression was careful, slightly uncertain, which on a face that appeared so accustomed to certainty looked like something borrowed from a different person. "We can come back another time if it's inconvenient," he said. "It's Saturday," Nadia said. "Come in." This time Theo settled in immediately, the way children settle into spaces they have already decided are safe. He knew where the chairs were. He went without prompting to the chair he had sat in before, as if saving it had been the plan all along. Nadia produced pencils and paper without being asked, and within 3 minutes Theo was drawing something that he said was a dragon, although it bore a close resemblance to a large, enthusiastic dog. Edward sat across the room in the chair that was clearly Rose's chair, but which she had, in a gesture that anyone who knew her would understand was significant, indicated he could use. He looked at his son drawing. He watched him with the particular quality of attention that parents have, the noticing that never entirely stops. But underneath the habitual parental watching, there was something else, a question, a comparison, something he was turning over. Rose brought tea. She did not offer to make a conversation out of it. But when Edward said, "Thank you," she met his eyes briefly and gave the smallest nod, which in Rose's language of nods meant you are permitted to continue being here. "He's different here," Edward said, quietly enough that only Rose could hear. He had not planned to say it. It came out before the filter engaged. Rose looked at Theo, who was now asking Nadia with great seriousness whether dragons could breathe fire and ice at the same time. "They can breathe both," Nadia was telling him firmly, "but only one at a time. It's like coughing. Theo is always different when he feels comfortable," Rose said. "How do you make him feel comfortable so quickly?" There was something raw in the question, something that was trying to sound like a practical inquiry, and not succeeding entirely. "We don't make him anything," Rose said. "We leave the space open and let him decide what he is." Edward looked at her. He stopped. "Simple," Rose offered. "I was going to say impossible. It's only impossible when you've already decided what you want them to be." He was quiet for a while after that. And then, gradually, and then all at once, the way these things tend to happen, the visits became regular. Every Saturday, sometimes a Tuesday after school, when Edward had someone who could drop Theo, because there were, in Edward Harland's life, people whose role it was to be where he could not be, and they were professional and reliable, and they cared about Theo in the way that professional, reliable people who are paid to care about children do care about them, which is not nothing, but is also not the same thing as a Sunday biscuit given because she didn't have to. Theo and Nadia fell into the easy, natural rhythm of children who have decided to be friends without making a production of deciding it. They drew together. They argued about things the way friends argue, loudly and without malice, and with a complete disregard for whether any adult in the room thought the argument was necessary. Theo had strong opinions about which colors went together, and Nadia had strong opinions about most things, and the collision of these two positions produced a great deal of noise and not very much resolution, which suited them both. Rose found herself looking forward to Saturdays. She did not say this to anyone. Edward Harland, for his part, began staying longer each visit. At first he stayed in the chair, quiet, looking at his phone, which had a near-constant incoming tide of messages and calls. But slowly, and Rose watched this with the patience of someone who knows that watching is itself a thing you can do, he began to put the phone in his pocket. He began to watch Theo and Nadia instead. He began occasionally to speak. He asked Nadia about school. She told him about her science project with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to downplay her enthusiasm, describing the chemical reaction she had produced in a way that was both technically accurate and delivered with the kind of pure joy that makes the topic irrelevant and the joy itself the whole point. Edward listened, really listened, not the kind of listening that is actually just waiting for a gap in which to speak. The other kind. "You're very clever," he said when she finished. "I know," Nadia said pleasantly. "Gran says knowing it doesn't count unless you do something with it." "She's right. She usually is," Nadia said. "It's quite annoying." Edward looked across at Rose, who was at the counter and had heard every word. Rose's back was to him, but he saw the set of her shoulders, which had shifted very slightly in a way that Rose's shoulders shifted when she was suppressing a smile. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the visits had started, when everything shifted. Edward had come himself that day. No driver, no arrangements. And he had arrived slightly earlier than expected with Theo, and Rose had let them in, and Nadia had immediately dragged Theo to the table with the clear purpose of continuing a drawing project that had apparently been preoccupying her all week. Edward was in the chair. His phone was in his pocket. The evening was quiet and domestic and warm. And then Theo, without looking up from his drawing, said, "Dad, why do you look sad sometimes when you think no one's watching?" The room went very quiet. Edward opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't," he started. "You do," Theo said calmly, with the infuriating certainty of a small child who has observed something truly and is not open to contradiction. "Like when you think I'm asleep. You sit in the chair in my room and you look sad." Nadia had stopped drawing. Rose had stopped what she was doing at the counter. Nobody moved. Edward looked at his son. The composure, the careful, constructed, load-bearing composure that held Edward Harland upright in boardrooms and across negotiating tables and in front of cameras and through all the countless demanding moments of the life he had built, cracked. Not shattered, just cracked. One line, running right down the middle. "I'm not sad," he said. I'm thinking." "About what?" "About you." The words came out before he stopped them. Theo considered this. "Do you miss Mom too?" he asked. Nobody breathed. "Yes," Edward said. The word came out flat and quiet and without decoration because there was no decoration for it. Theo put down his pencil. He got off his chair. He walked across the room to where his father was sitting, and he climbed up in a chair beside him. There was just enough room, and he leaned his head against Edward's arm. "Me too," Theo said. And then, "But I'm still here. You don't have to be sad when I'm here." Edward Harland put his arm around his son, and he looked up, not meaning to, not planning to, just doing it because the room had pulled his eyes up, and he looked at Rose, who was looking at him with an expression that had shed its careful neutrality and was something much more open, much more human. She looked away first. She went to put on the kettle. Her hands were not entirely steady. Nadia, who had seen everything and understood more of it than a 10-year-old perhaps should have, looked down at her drawing and picked up her pencil and drew very carefully for a while, as if she hadn't heard, as if the room needed her to make that particular small gift of privacy. It was not a story Edward told all at once. It came in parts, over several Saturdays, the way grief comes, not in a straight line, but in a spiral, returning to the same places from slightly different angles each time. Theo's mother, her name was Lena, had died 18 months ago. A sudden thing, the kind of thing that has no preamble and leaves no instructions for how to go on without it. She had been 34 years old and had laughed a lot and made Edward laugh too, which was a thing he had not before understood was rare until it was gone. She had loved Theo in the total, unself-conscious way that had made parenthood look effortless from the outside, even when it was exhausting, because love that total tends to look like ease. After she died, Edward said to Rose one Saturday, while Theo and Nadia were in the garden, I kept thinking the way to handle it was to make sure Theo had everything. Everything he needed. Everything he could possibly want. So I built a structure. I hired people. The right people. I made sure that every hour of his day was accounted for, every need covered. And, Rose said, she was sitting across from him. She had a cup of tea. She was not rushing him. And he was fine, technically. In all the measurable ways, he was fine. Edward looked at his hands. But I watched him in there, he tilted his head toward the garden. And I thought, I don't think he looks like that at home. Not like that. Not that easy. What does he look like at home? Careful, Edward said, after a moment. Like he's trying not to take up too much space. Rose said nothing. I don't know how to fix it, Edward said. And it was clear, from the way he said it, that this was perhaps the sentence that cost him the most in his life. A man for whom not knowing how to fix something was a personal failure of the highest order. Maybe, Rose said slowly, it's not something you fix. Maybe it's something you notice. She paused. You just told me. You noticed. That's where it starts. I don't know if I'm noticing in time. He's 5, Rose said, and he came and put his head on your arm. You've not missed a window, Edward. She did not use his first name often. The time she did, it landed differently. He looked at her. My daughter left, Rose said quietly. It was not something she had planned to say. Nadia's mother. She left when Nadia was 3. She has her reasons, and I don't discuss them. Not even with Nadia. Not yet. Not until Nadia is old enough to hold the whole truth of a person and not just the part that hurt her. But she left. Rose looked into her cup. And I have spent every day since wondering if I'm doing enough. If I'm being enough. And the answer most days is I don't know. But I get up and I try. And Nadia is, she stopped. Breathed. She is extraordinary. And I cannot tell you how much of that is me and how much of it is just entirely her, because I suspect it's mostly her. But I tried. I showed up. Every day. She looked at him. That's all you have to do. Show up. The rest follows. They sat in silence for a moment that was not uncomfortable. From the garden came the sound of Theo explaining to Nadia, at considerable volume, that the stick he had found was not just a stick, but a very specific kind of sword, and Nadia saying that she was quite sure it was a stick. Edward Harland, for the first time and longer than he could easily remember, laughed. It was Rose who brought it up. She did not bring it up easily. It was a Tuesday evening in November, darker earlier now, the kind of evening that made the lamp in the kitchen feel necessary and good. Nadia was upstairs. Theo was not there. Edward had come alone, which had been happening more, these quiet check-ins that had no name and no formal structure. Rose sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. The scholarship, she said. Yes. The school is asking for a decision. About secondary school. There are 2 on the list they've sent. Both of them would require Nadia to travel. And one of them is a boarding option. What does Nadia want? She wants the one that has the best science department. Rose said it with the quiet certainty of a woman who had asked and received an immediate, clear, unambiguous answer, because Nadia's answers about things she cared about were always immediate and clear and unambiguous. Which one is that? Thornfield. It's 40 minutes by train. Then Thornfield, Edward said. It's also, Rose said, carefully, the more expensive one. I know. The scholarship covers it. I don't want Nadia to feel. Rose paused. Chose the words deliberately. She's 10. She doesn't fully understand where the money is coming from yet, or why, and one day she will, and I want to make sure that when she understands it, she doesn't feel like she owes something. Like her education is a debt. Edward was quiet for a moment. It's not a debt, he said. He thought. It's the most honest thing I've done in a long time. Paying that forward. I'm not doing it for Nadia. I mean, I am. She's brilliant and she deserves it, but I'm doing it because he's struggled. I have 4.2 billion pounds. I'm told this number regularly, in reports, in newspapers, in conversations with people who find it impressive. And the most valuable thing that has happened to me in the last year was a 10-year-old girl who opened a door and gave my son a biscuit she didn't have to give. He stopped. You can't buy that, he said quietly. I've tried to buy everything I've ever needed. You can't buy what happened in this kitchen. You can't buy the way Theo looks when he's here. So the scholarship isn't a payment. It's the only language I have that comes close to saying what I want to say, which is thank you, and I see it, and it matters. Rose looked at him for a long time. All right, she said. Thornfield. It was a Saturday in December when the biscuit became everything. The afternoon had been ordinary in the way that the best Saturdays tend to be, unremarkable in its components, irreplaceable as a whole. Theo and Nadia had drawn. They had argued about the correct color of a dragon's stomach. They had eaten biscuits, the good ones, and Theo had made a small ceremony of selecting his, inspecting it, then eating it with the focused reverence of a child who understands, somehow, that this particular biscuit is different from other biscuits without being able to say why. Edward had stayed all afternoon. His phone had remained in his pocket. At one point, Nadia had asked him to draw something, and he had drawn a car which was not very good, and Theo had said, Dad, that looks like a shoe, and Nadia had said a very expensive shoe, and Edward had laughed the real laugh again, the one that was not managed. They were leaving. Coats and shoes at the door, Theo being extracted from the drawing project with the patient but firm efficiency that parents develop, when Edward asked, casually, walking to the car in the early dark of December, what was your favorite part of today? He asked it the way parents ask things, conversationally, not expecting the answer that came. Theo walked beside him, hands in his yellow coat pockets, thinking with full seriousness. Not the drawing, he said, working through a list, apparently. No, the drawing was good, but not my favorite. What then? Not the dragon argument. He considered. Well, the dragon argument was very good, but not my favorite. Theo, Edward said, patient, amused. What was your favorite? Theo stopped walking. He stopped right there on the quiet pavement of Kestrel Lane, under the orange of the streetlight, and he looked up at his father with an expression of total, uncomplicated honesty. The biscuit, he said. Edward looked at him. The biscuit. Yes. Theo seemed to understand that explanation was required. He gave it with the gravity of a small professor. The drawing is always there when I come, and Nadia is always there, and Gran Rose always makes tea. All those things are there every time. But the biscuit, he paused. Nadia didn't have to give me the biscuit. The first time I came, she didn't have to. I was a stranger. I didn't know her. She just gave it to me. The cold December air was very still. I always think about that, Theo said. When people do things they don't have to do. Edward Harland stood on the pavement outside number 14 Kestrel Lane and looked at his 5-year-old son. And something inside him, something he had been carrying for 18 months, something built before that, something that had accumulated in the quiet, expensive, managed, structured silence of a life run on provision and performance, split. Not broke, opened, like a door. When did you get so wise? He said, very quietly. Theo shrugged. Nadia says I'm observant. He looked pleased with the word. She says it like it's good. It is good. They got into the car. Edward started the engine. He drove for 3 minutes, and then he pulled over on a quiet side street. And he sat with the engine running and his hands on the wheel and his eyes not looking at anything. Theo, in the back, was already telling someone, himself, or perhaps just the darkness, about the dragon that could breathe fire and ice. Edward thought about all the things he had given his son in the last 18 months. The perfect room, the right schools, the right clothes, the right people, the right structure, everything that provision could provide and money could buy and planning could arrange. He thought about a biscuit from a tin on a shelf, given freely, without agenda, without transaction, just because a strange, frightened boy was cold and hungry, and she had biscuits and she could. He sat there for a long time. That night, he did something he had not done in a very long time. Theo was supposed to go to bed at 8. The routine was established. The people who managed the routine were very good at it, and Theo cooperated with the routine in the way that children cooperate with well-established structures. Not enthusiastically, but consistently. At 7:50, instead of beginning the handover, Edward sat on the floor of Theo's room. Just sat on the floor, cross-legged like a child. No phone. No reason. Theo, who was assembling something complicated out of wooden blocks, looked at him. "What are you doing?" Theo asked. "Sitting on the floor." "I can see that." Theo went back to his blocks. After a moment, "Are you going to help?" "With what?" "The tower." Theo pointed at the architectural ambition taking shape in front of him. "It keeps falling. I think the bottom is wrong." Edward looked at the tower. He reached over and picked up a block. He put it where it seemed to need to go. "There," he said. Theo studied it. "Better," he admitted. They built the tower together until it was past 8, and then past 8:30, and then at 9 o'clock Theo fell asleep on the floor with his cheek on a wooden block, and Edward picked him up and put him in bed with the specific careful tenderness that large people use with very small people. As though force were an option they're deliberately choosing not to take. He sat in the chair in Theo's room afterward. The chair he always sat in. The chair Theo had seen him sitting in. He did not look sad. He looked for the first time in a year and a half like someone who was beginning, slowly, imperfectly without a plan, to come home. It was Nadia who asked the question that no one else had thought to ask, or had thought to ask and decided not to. She was 10, and she did not yet have the social machinery that tells people when a question is too direct, which meant she asked it on a Wednesday afternoon when Edward had come to collect Theo and had stayed for tea. "Do you think you were a good dad before?" she said. Just like that. Over her biscuit. Edward went very still. Rose, from the counter, closed her eyes briefly. "Nadia," she said. "It's a real question," Nadia said, unapologetically. "I'm not being mean. I'm asking because I want to know." Edward looked at Nadia for a moment. And then he made a decision, which was that she deserved a real answer, because she had asked a real question. He stopped. Started again. "I think I provided. I made sure Theo had everything safe and covered and arranged. And I thought that was being a good dad because I thought that was what being a good dad was." He paused. "And then I saw him in here with you and your gran, and I thought, no, that's not all of it. That's not even the main part of it." Nadia considered this with great seriousness. "My mom left," she said. "Conversationally. I don't remember her really. Gran takes care of me." "I know. And Gran is the best person I know." She looked at him steadily. "But I still think about my mom. I think about what she would be like. I make up different versions." She tilted her head. "Theo thinks about his mom too." "Yes. But he has you," Nadia said. "He has you, and you're here. Every Saturday. You're getting better at sitting on the floor." She picked up her biscuit. "So I think the answer to my question is, you're getting better." Edward looked at this 10-year-old girl with her knees pulled up and her biscuit and her completely honest face. "Thank you," he said, and meant it more than most thank yous he had said in his life. "You're welcome," Nadia said. "Gran is better at this than you. But you're learning." From the counter, Rose said nothing. But this time she did not try to suppress the smile. Rose did not tell her story easily or all at once. She told it the way she did most things, in her own time, at her own pace, when the moment was right and she had decided the listener could be trusted with it. It was a Sunday evening. Theo and Edward had come and gone, and Nadia was in her room, and Rose was at the table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, when she said, unprompted, to no one in particular, or perhaps to the kitchen itself, "My husband left too, before Nadia's mother was grown." She had not intended to say it aloud. But sometimes things come out when a house has been filled with enough honest conversation, as if the walls have absorbed it and it becomes easier to breathe. She picked up the tea, drank it even though it was cold. "He was not a bad man," she said, still to the kitchen. "He just could not hold still. Some people can't. The world keeps moving and they have to move with it. I don't think he planned to leave us. I think he woke up one day and found he already had." She sat for a while. "I was angry for a long time, and then I was just tired of being angry. And then I was just me and my daughter, and then her daughter, and it got smaller and smaller, and then it was fine. It was what it was. You can be angry about the shape of your life, or you can live it. I decided to live it. She finished the cold tea. "I'm telling you this," she said, and now she was aware that she was not talking to the kitchen, that she was talking to herself, testing the sound of something she had been thinking since a tall man in an expensive coat had stood in this kitchen and offered her an envelope and been turned down. "I am telling you this because I think he's a good man. I think he got lost, the way people get lost, and I think his boy walking through that door I think that was the way back." She put down the cup. Upstairs, Nadia's music drifted through the ceiling. "And the biscuits helped," Rose said. And in the empty kitchen, alone, she smiled. 3 days after the biscuit conversation, Edward's assistant sent a message to the office that Friday's full-day schedule was to be rearranged. His assistant, who had worked for him for 11 years and thought she had seen every professional development the man was capable of, read this message twice. She rearranged the schedule. Edward spent Friday morning at Theo's school. Not because anything was wrong, not for a meeting or a conference or a specific educational event, but because Theo's class was doing a project about weather patterns and they needed parent volunteers to help set up the instruments in the school garden. And when the letter had come home, Edward had read it and then read it again, and then, instead of filing it in the part of his brain where things that were someone else's job to attend to were filed, he had written his name on the reply slip himself, with a pen. His own name, his own handwriting. He stood in a school garden in November and helped 8 5-year-olds figure out which way was north using a compass. And Theo stood next to him and whispered helpful commentary in his ear. "Jasper always points the wrong way on purpose, Dad, just so you know." And by the end of the morning, Edward Harland, who chaired boards and directed the development of buildings that changed city skylines, had a compass reading worksheet with a gold star sticker on it because Miss Patrice gave them to anyone who answered correctly, and she had not been looking at the age of the person answering. He had the worksheet in his jacket pocket when he arrived at Kestrel Lane that Saturday. He showed it to Rose before he said hello. He held it up without explanation. Rose looked at the gold star. Then she looked at him, and she did something she had not yet done in all the Saturdays he had been coming through her door. She laughed. It was a real laugh. A short one, involuntary, the kind that escapes before you have the chance to manage it. She pressed her lips together immediately after, as though recapturing her dignity, but the laugh had happened. It was in the room. It cannot be taken back. "Miss Patrice gives stars to everyone who gets it right," Edward said, completely straight-faced. "I know what Miss Patrice does," Rose said. "Come in." The invitation came on a quiet Saturday in January. Edward made it carefully, not as a grand gesture, not with the energy of someone waiting to impress. He made it simply and slightly awkwardly, which Rose had come to recognize as the register in which he was most honest. "Theo keeps asking," he said. "He wants to show Nadia his room. And I thought, if you'd both come to us one Saturday. Just a visit. Nothing arranged. Just," he paused, "just normal." Rose looked at Nadia, who was already looking at Rose with an expression of contained, volcanic enthusiasm. "Normal," Rose said. "As normal as I can manage," Edward said honestly. "Which is, I'm working on it." "We'll come," Rose said. The house was, well, it was what Nadia's mind had already half built from the articles on the tablet, and yet it was also entirely different from what she had imagined, because what she had imagined was a very large version of an ordinary house, and what she found was something else, a very large house that felt, despite its size, somehow quieter than a house should feel. Too clean. Too arranged. Beautiful the way a picture of a house is beautiful, which is to say, correctly and at a distance, and without the smell of soup or the sound of music through the ceiling. Theo met them at the door. He was wearing the yellow waterproof jacket indoors, which seemed to be a choice he had made independently, and which Edward had accepted without comment, and the sight of Nadia had produced in him an expression of such complete and uncomplicated delight that Nadia grinned before she had even said hello. "Come and see my room," Theo said, and took her hand. Rose and Edward stood in the wide hallway and listened to the sound of Theo's small, urgent footsteps on the stairs, and then the higher, slightly more measured footsteps of Nadia following him. "Shall we have coffee?" Edward said. "Yes," said Rose. And then, because the house was pressing its quietness at her from every room, "Do you always have music?" "No," he said. "Should I?" "Nadia always has music," Rose said. I used to mind. I don't anymore. Edward took out his phone. A moment later, something low and warm came from speakers somewhere that Rose could not locate. She did not ask what the music was. She followed him to the kitchen, which was large and white and well-equipped, and had the particular sterility of a kitchen that is not cooked in very often. She did not say this, but when he put the kettle on and then went to locate the coffee, she moved without thinking about it to the counter and picked up the pot that was nearest to hand and tilted it to check what was in it. Stock. A good one. She smelled it. You cook, she said. He turned. Sometimes. Not well. Theo likes scrambled eggs, so that's usually what happens. Scrambled eggs is a start, Rose said. I burned them twice last week. Three's the charm, Rose said. And then, still holding the pot, she looked around the kitchen with the same careful, calibrated look she had given the workers who came to fix her roof. Assessing, honest, respectful. It's a beautiful house, she said. It is, Edward agreed. He handed her the coffee. But it doesn't feel the way your house feels. No, I don't know how to make it feel that way. Rose considered the kitchen. More cooking, she said after a moment. More mess. More staying in the room, even when there's nothing to do in it. More music through the ceiling. She sipped the coffee. It's a practice. You practice it the way you practice anything. Is that what you did? That's what life did, Rose said. I didn't have the option to arrange things differently. So I just stayed. And it became a home because I was always in it. From upstairs came the sound of Theo explaining his room to Nadia with the thoroughness of an estate agent who is also 5 and therefore not entirely coherent, but absolutely committed. Nadia's responses were audible, short, interested, occasionally corrective. Edward looked at the ceiling. She's good with him, he said. She's good with everyone, Rose said. She just hasn't unlearned it yet. Coming home from Edward's house that evening, Nadia was quiet in a way that was not sad, but was thinking. Rose watched her from the corner of her eye on the bus and did not press it. At home, with her coat off and her shoes at the door and the lamp on in the kitchen, the real lamp, the lamp that meant home, Nadia sat at the table. His house is really big, she said. It is, but it feels smaller than ours. Rose sat down across from her. How do you mean? Nadia thought about it carefully. She was always careful with things she thought were important. Our house has sound in it, she said, even when we're not making any. His house is quiet, even when they're in it. She frowned, like the house doesn't know them yet. Rose looked at her granddaughter. Or, Nadia said, like they don't know the house yet. Because they're not. She searched for it. They're not all the way in it. He's always halfway out. Like he's always just about to leave for work, even when he's home. He's working on that, Rose said. I know. Nadia picked up a biscuit from the tin she had quietly opened without ceremony, the way she always did. I told him. Rose blinked. You told him. On the way down from Theo's room. I said his house was very nice, but it needed to be lived in more. I said it the nice way. What did he say? Nadia thought about it. He said he was trying to figure out how. And I said it's not something you figure out. It's something you just do. She took a bite of biscuit. Like breathing. You don't figure out breathing. You just do it, and you keep doing it. Rose stared at her granddaughter. Did he seem upset? She asked carefully. No, Nadia said. He laughed. The real one. It was Rose who got the call. She did not expect to be on the list of people Edward Harland called in a crisis. She was not on any list he had. She had not given him her number. He had found it, which he had suspected he was capable of and had not minded, because a man who has access to that much information using it to write down a phone number seemed like the least of the available concerns. He called on a Wednesday morning in February. I need to ask you something, he said, and I want you to tell me the truth because you will and because I need it. Ask, Rose said. There's a situation at the company, a decision I have to make. There are 2 options. He paused. Option 1 is what is best for the company financially. It involves letting go of 47 people. They're good people. They've done nothing wrong. The market changed, and their division is no longer profitable, and the financially sound decision is to close it. Rose listened. Option 2 is that I absorb the loss, restructure, and keep the division. It will cost me significantly, personally and professionally, and it will mean I have to make compromises elsewhere that are professionally uncomfortable. But 47 people keep their jobs. Rose was quiet for a moment. Why are you calling me? she said. Not unkindly. Genuinely. Because, Edward said, I have spent the last 2 months watching you make decisions. And I have noticed that you don't make them based on what is easiest or most convenient or most financially sensible. You make them based on what is right. And I seem to have lost the manual for that. Rose stood at her kitchen window. Outside, the February morning was gray and still. The envelope, she said. I'm sorry. The night you came to get Theo, you had an envelope. You had already decided what was right because it was easiest and it was what you always do. You put a price on something and you handed it over. I said no, and you heard me. She paused. You already know the answer to your question, Edward. You knew it before you called. A long silence. Option 2, he said. You're keeping 47 jobs, Rose said. Another silence. Yes. Good. Rose moved away from the window. Come on Saturday. I'll make proper soup. Not the heated up kind. He made a sound she was coming to recognize as the sound he made when he was trying not to show how much something had landed. Thank you, Rose. You're welcome. Don't be late. It was a Tuesday in February, and it started with a phone call that was not from Edward. It was from a woman named Patricia, a journalist, she said, from a financial publication that Rose had vaguely heard of and Nadia had absolutely not. She called the landline, which almost no one did, which told Rose immediately that this was someone who had gone to some trouble to find the number. I'm calling about Edward Harland, the woman said. Her voice was professionally warm, which is to say not warm at all. We understand you have a relationship with him and his son. We'd love to get a comment from you about the nature of... No, Rose said. Mrs. O'Say, if I could just... No, Rose said again. Whatever you think you know about our household, and whatever you think it means, and whatever story you are writing, you will write it without anything from me. Good day. She put the phone down. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she called the number Edward had given her. She had it in the small book by the phone, written in her own handwriting, which was precise and unhurried. And when he answered, she told him what had happened. His silence on the other end was the silence of a man who is managing something. I'm sorry, he said. I should have warned you this was possible. Someone at the company talked. It's not unusual. These things get out. I'm sorry that she called you. I'm not bothered about the call, Rose said. I'm telling you so you know. And I'm telling you that Nadia is not to be involved in whatever comes of this. Of course. I mean it, Edward. She's 10 years old. Whatever they write about you and your company and your property portfolio and however many billions, none of that touches this house. And none of it touches Nadia. It won't, he said. And he said it with the quietness of someone making a real promise rather than managing a situation. Good. Rose paused. Are you all right? The question surprised him. It surprised her slightly too. I'm fine. This happens. It'll run its course. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Longer. No, he said. Not entirely. I don't love the idea of people speculating about what's happened. About Theo. About your family. I don't want you to become a story. We won't become a story, Rose said firmly. We're not characters in your life. We're just people who made soup. He made the sound. The one she had cataloged. The one that meant she had said something real and he was letting it land. Just people who made soup, he repeated. Saturday, Rose said. Come on Saturday. Bring Theo. I'll make the real soup. The article ran that Thursday. It was not unkind. It was careful and circumspect, and it mentioned, in passing, that Harland had been spending time in an Elmfield neighborhood, and that sources suggested a renewed focus on personal matters. There was no mention of names. There was no mention of Kestrel Lane. Nadia read it on the tablet at breakfast on Friday morning. We're personal matters, she said. Rose looked up. The article, Nadia said, holding up the tablet. He's been seen spending time in Elmfield. Focus on personal matters. She looked at Rose. That's us. Yes. How do you feel about that? Rose considered it. Fine, she said. We're personal. That's correct. We're not professional matters. We're not business dealings. She picked up her cup. Personal is exactly right. Nadia put down the tablet and picked up her spoon and went back to her porridge, apparently satisfied. Also, she said between spoonfuls, for £0.2 billion. Nadia, he still only has 1 gold star from Miss Patrice. Rose very nearly choked on her tea. There was an afternoon in the middle of March, the pale, tentative March that comes before the real warmth, when everything looks like it is deciding whether to commit to spring, when Nadia taught Edward something that none of his advisors, none of his associates, none of the people who had surrounded him for 11 years of building one of the largest private property companies in the country had ever managed to teach him. She did it without meaning to. She did it, in fact, while eating an apple and ostensibly doing homework. Theo had fallen asleep on the sofa. He did this with the same serene, unannounced confidence with which he did everything. And Edward and Nadia were at the kitchen table, Nadia with her maths workbook open, Edward with the report he was allowed to read on Saturdays now, or rather the report he kept picking up and putting down because the kitchen was a more interesting place to be than inside a quarterly projection. "Can I ask you something?" Nadia said, not looking up from her page. "Yes," Edward said. "When you make a decision at work, a really big one, how do you decide?" Edward set down the report. This was a question worth his full attention. "I look at the data," he said. "I assess the risk. I consider the variables. I consult with the people who know the most about each relevant area." Nadia looked up, and then I decide. She chewed her apple. "Consider this. What about how it feels?" "How it?" He stopped. "What do you mean?" "Like when you're about to decide, and you haven't decided yet, and you go still inside." She pressed a hand briefly to her own sternum, almost unconsciously. "That still place. Do you listen to that?" Edward looked at her. "That's instinct," he said. "I take that into account." "Gran says it's not instinct," Nadia said. "Gran says that place is where you already know the answer, but you're not sure yet if you're brave enough to go with it." Edward was quiet for a moment. "She said that. She says it to me when I'm scared before a test. She says the still place knows. She says the noise." Nadia gestured at the air vaguely, meaning the world, meaning all the surrounding information and opinion and data. The noise is useful, but the still place is usually more right. Edward picked up his report. "Put down again. She's an extraordinary woman, your grandmother." "I know," Nadia said, already back to her maths. "Everyone who spends enough time with her figures that out. You just took a bit longer than most." He laughed. And Nadia smiled at her workbook with the precise smugness of a child who has said exactly the right thing and knows it. In the weeks that followed, and this was something Edward noticed with the careful, grateful attention of a man who has started to notice things, Theo began to talk more. Not more in general, more specifically, more truthfully. Not the careful, contained way he talked at home when he was choosing his words with the unconscious diplomacy of a child who has learned that some feelings are complicated for adults, but the open, unedited way he talked at Kestrel Lane, where things could be said and they would just land quietly and nobody would make more of them than they were. He told Nadia that he was afraid of the dark in the left side of his room, but not the right side. And Nadia listened and said, "That's interesting. Why do you think that is?" And they had a 10-minute investigation into the geography of his fear that ended with Theo deciding it was the shape of the wardrobe and was probably fixable with a nightlight shaped like a star, and Nadia agreeing and making a note of this as if it were a scientific finding, which to her it basically was. He told Rose one afternoon that he missed his mother most on Tuesdays, and he was not sure why it was Tuesdays specifically, and Rose sat down across from him and said, "I don't know why Tuesdays either, but missing is allowed on any day of the week, and there is no wrong time for it." And Theo nodded and ate 3 biscuits in a row without being offered them, which Rose permitted without comment. He told Edward, in the car, in the held-between space, that he wished they could have dinner at Nadia's house sometimes. "The kitchen smells right," he said, which Edward understood completely and absolutely, and which broke something in him cleanly and honestly in the way that his son's honesty always did. "I can learn," Edward said. "I'm learning the scrambled eggs." "The scrambled eggs were better last week," Theo said, with the impartiality of a food critic who happens to be 5. "Yes," Edward agreed. "You need to not stir them so much," Theo said. "Nadia told me." She looked it up. "Nadia looked up scrambled eggs for me?" "She said you needed help," Theo said simply. "So she looked it up." Edward drove the rest of the way home thinking about a 10-year-old girl who had looked up scrambled egg technique on behalf of a billionaire because she had decided he needed the help, and that was just what you did when people needed things, and you could provide them. He practiced the scrambled eggs 4 more times that week. By Friday they were, by any reasonable measure, correct. It was on a Saturday in late March, the Saturday before the one that ended with the T, that Rose said the thing she had been circling for months. Theo and Nadia were in the garden. The day was mild enough to be out there, barely, and they had taken the drawing project outside, spreading paper on the garden table with the focused purposefulness of people embarking on something serious. The dragon and ice debate had apparently been resolved, and they were now working on what Nadia described as a complete mythology, which seemed to involve a great many creatures and an ambitious system of rules. Edward was helping. He had been conscripted into this project without quite knowing how it had happened, and he was now sitting at the garden table drawing what he had been informed was a sea serpent. Though Nadia had taken one look at his first attempt and said, "That looks like a confused fish," and taken the pencil out of his hand and shown him the correct spinal curvature of a mythological serpent, which she had apparently researched. Rose stood at the kitchen door and watched the three of them. Theo's voice carried on the mild air. Nadia's corrections carried louder. Edward's responses, patient, slightly amused, increasingly engaged, carried too. She stayed in the doorway. Later, when the children were inside and Edward was washing his hands at the kitchen sink, a domestic, unremarkable action that would have seemed impossible on the night he first walked through that door, Rose said, from her chair, "You know what the difference is?" He turned off the tap. "Between what?" "Between where you started and where you are now." He dried his hands on the towel she had indicated with a small gesture. "Tell me." "At the beginning," Rose said, "you were present in every room. You were in the way that furniture is present. You took up space. You were there. But you were not." She paused. "Found it. You were not available. You were in the room, but you weren't reachable. A person couldn't land with you. A feeling couldn't land with you. Theo's words couldn't find you inside all the management and the arrangement and the provision." Edward leaned against the counter. He was listening with the whole of him. He had learned to do that. "Now," Rose said, "you're available. Something can land. Theo says something and it reaches you and you feel it. You don't immediately go to fix it or solve it or improve it. You just let it land." She looked at him steadily. "That's the whole of parenting, really. Being available. Being somewhere your child can find you when they go looking." Edward was quiet for a long time. "My father was never available," he said finally. It was not something he had intended to say. It simply came out, as things come out in rooms where honest things have been said for long enough. "No," Rose said, in the voice that meant she had already known this and had been waiting for him to say it. "He was present," Edward said, "in the way you described. He was there. He provided. He was in the room. But you couldn't," he stopped. "You couldn't reach him. Not really. I tried for a long time. Then I stopped trying. And you became him," Rose said. "Not cruelly. Simply, the way a doctor names something." "Yes," Edward said. "I became him. Without noticing it. I built the same architecture. And now you're dismantling it. Trying to. That's all that's required," Rose said. "Trying. Continuing to try. The trying is the thing." She got up and moved to the stove. She had soup on, the real kind, the kind that had been going since morning. She lifted the lid and checked it and replaced the lid with the satisfaction of someone whose soup has arrived where they wanted it. "Your father," she said, without turning around. "Is he still living?" "Yes." We're not close." "No," Rose said. "You wouldn't be. Do you think it could be changed?" He asked it carefully, like handling something fragile. "Between him and me. At this stage." Rose stood at the stove for a moment. "I think," she said, "that you can only open your door. What the other person does with it is theirs." She turned. "But I'd open it. I would not wait. Life is not as long as we plan on it being." From the garden came the sound of Theo asking Nadia an urgent question about whether sea serpents could be friends with dragons or if they were natural enemies. "Natural enemies," Nadia was saying with great certainty, "but they can still be allies. Like people." Edward looked out the window at his son. "Like people," he said quietly. "Yes," Rose said. "Exactly like people." March came, and with it the first real warmth of the year. The kind of warmth that shows up tentatively, like an apology after a long, hard winter, making everything look slightly surprised to still be here. The Saturdays had become something else by then. They had become, and there was no other word for it, ordinary. The good kind of ordinary. The kind that, when you look back on a life, you find hidden between the big moments like packing material, and you realize it was the packing material that kept everything from breaking. Theo had learned, over the months, where Rose kept the biscuits. He went there himself now, without asking. Rose had never said he could, she had simply never said he couldn't, and he had understood, with the precise social intelligence that children deploy when they are comfortable, that this was permission. He went to the tin on a Saturday in March and selected 2 biscuits with great care and carried them back to the table and gave one to Nadia without comment. Nadia took it without comment. Edward watched this small, domestic, unremarkable exchange from his chair. His phone was in his pocket. The report he was supposed to have read by Monday was in his bag, unread. He had made a decision somewhere around January that the report could wait until Sunday. That Saturday was here, was whatever was happening at the table between his son and the girl who had given him a biscuit on the first night. They're going to be friends for a long time, Nadia told Rose once on a Tuesday when Theo wasn't there. How do you know? Rose had asked. Nadia had shrugged, with the confidence of someone stating a fact that is simply true. Because he tells me things, and he listens. That's what friends do. It's not complicated. No, Rose had agreed. It isn't. It happened in the way that the most significant moments happen in ordinary lives, without announcement, without a score, without any signal that the moment would later be the one that mattered most when looking back. It was a Saturday in late March. The evening had come in the way March evenings do, gently, the light holding on a little longer than it had the week before. Theo had fallen asleep on Rose's sofa, tucked under the blue blanket that lived on the arm of it, the one that was soft in the specific way that old blankets get soft through years of being useful. He had fallen asleep mid-sentence, as 5-year-olds do, without negotiation or preamble, just simply leaving the conversation and going somewhere warmer. Nadia had gone upstairs. The music was drifting down through the ceiling. Edward was at the kitchen table. He had not moved to go. He was not sure, entirely, why he had not moved. He had a son asleep in the next room and a car outside and a house 40 minutes away that was being, slowly, lived in more than it was before. But he had not moved. Rose came into the kitchen. She moved around it in the easy, practiced way she moved in it, not in a hurry, not performing anything, just occupying the space she had occupied for years. She went to the stove. She put the kettle on. She did not ask. She did not say, "Would you like some tea?" or "I'm making tea. Do you want some?" or any of the dozen formulations of the question that include the question. She simply put the kettle on and got down 2 cups and put a tea bag in each. Edward watched her do it. When the tea was made, she brought it to the table. She set 1 cup in front of him. She sat down across from him with the other. He looked at the cup. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression that was uniquely Rose's. Not warm, not cold, not anything performed. Just present. Just the full weight of a person who sees you and is not afraid of what she sees and is not going to make a thing of it. She gave a small nod. It was a nod that meant, "You are welcome here." Not as a debt and not as a charity. Not because you gave us a roof or a scholarship or because you're the father of a boy we love. Because you sat in this kitchen through the Saturdays and you listened and you changed and you are changing still, and a house is allowed to decide who belongs in it. And this house has decided. Edward Harland looked down at the cup of tea that had been made for him without being asked. He thought about a biscuit given to a strange, frightened boy by a girl who didn't have to. He thought about the door open to a child on a rainy night by a girl who didn't hesitate. He thought about a woman who refused an envelope and accepted a conversation. He picked up the cup. He drank the tea. Outside, the March rain had started, soft this time, tentative, nothing like the hard rain of that first night. The lamp was on in the window. Upstairs, music came through the ceiling. In the next room, a 5-year-old boy was asleep under a blue blanket and breathing evenly in the way that children breathe when they're truly, completely safe. "Thank you," Edward said. He did not specify what for. "You're welcome," Rose said. She did not specify for what. They sat in the kitchen in the lamplight and drank their tea, and the rain came softly at the glass, and the door was closed against the night and open to everything else. Years from now, and this is the kind of thing that happens quietly without marking the date, Nadia would become a scientist. She would work in a field that had not yet fully named itself when she was 10, and she would be very good at it. In a clear, purposeful way, she was good at everything she cared about. She would receive awards in large rooms with good lighting, and she would stand at podiums and speak with the same directness she had always had, the directness that had not been trained or curated, but had simply always been there, like the lamp in the window. And in every interview she gave, when journalists asked where it started, who believed in her, what opened the door, she gave the same answer. Her grandmother, and a scholarship from a man who came to their house because his son got lost in the park. She never mentioned the biscuit. Some things are too true to explain easily. Theo Harland grew up knowing Kestrel Lane the way he knew his own reflection. He visited all his life. He brought his own children eventually, and they went to the biscuit tin with the same unerring instinct he always had, and Rose let them, in the same wordless way she had always let Theo, which is to say she said nothing and they understood. Edward called his father. It took him until April, 3 weeks after the cup of tea, 2 weeks after Rose said life is not as long as we plan on it being. The call was awkward, and it resolved nothing immediately, and the distance did not simply close because a phone had been picked up, but the door opened. Slightly. Enough to work with. There's a kind of kindness that asks nothing back. It is not the kindness of grand gestures or calculated generosity. It is smaller than that, and more difficult and more real. It is the kindness of an open door at night. A bowl of soup for a stranger. A biscuit from Sunday, Tin offered without a second thought. Nadia Osei was 10 years old. She did not know what a billionaire was on the night she opened the door. She knew that a small boy was wet and frightened and standing on her step, and she knew that she had the door and she could open it. So she opened it. What came through that door, the friendship, the scholarship, the repaired roof, the Saturdays, the conversations that changed a man's direction without either of them quite noticing the change was happening. None of that was the reason she opened it. She opened it because Theo needed someone to open it, and she was there, and she could. That is the whole of it. Rose Osei, who had spent a lifetime learning when to open doors and when to hold them closed, who had been hurt by open doors and healed by them, and who had not, in all that time, arrived at a simple policy, only a considered practice, reviewed moment by moment. Rose looked at the boy on the step that rainy night and looked at her granddaughter's face and made her decision. Let him in. Edward Harland, who had 4.2 billion pounds and a gap he could not name, and a son who went quiet in rooms that were too arranged, and who had stood in a small kitchen in Elmfield and offered money for something that money did not touch. Edward Harland drove away from that house the first night, not quite the same as he had arrived. Something small had shifted, the way small things shift that later turn out to have been enormous. Over the months that followed, he learned. Not quickly, not completely, not without stumbling, not without reverting, not without the old instincts rising when they were not invited. The reach for the fix, the transaction, the envelope. But he kept going back. He kept sitting in the chair. He kept putting the phone in his pocket. He sat on the floor. He drew with crayons. He burned scrambled eggs 3 times and then got them right. He listened. And Theo, small, observant, entirely honest Theo, grew easier in his own skin. Not all at once. Not because of any single thing, but steadily across the Saturdays in the way that children grow when they are in rooms where they are allowed to take up whatever space they naturally occupy. He still talked about his mother. He would for a long time. That was right and proper and nothing to be managed away. But he also told his father things. He told him things on the way home from Kestrel Lane, in the car, which had become one of those rare and valuable spaces, neither fully here nor there, held between destinations, where honest things are easier to say. He told them what he had noticed, what he had felt, what he thought about when no one was asking him what he thought. Edward listened. Every time. He got better at listening. He got better at not trying to solve what was not a problem, and not try to provide what was not a need, and not trying to arrange what was fine already as it was. He got better at being there. And on Kestrel Lane, in the house with the lamp in the window, and the music through the ceiling, and the good biscuits in the tin, and the soup that got made whenever there was someone who needed it. In that house, Rose Osei continued to do what she had always done. She held it open. The door. Her home. The space inside it. The room in her careful heart that she did not open easily and did not open cheaply, but that, once opened, did not close. She held it open. And that, in the end, after everything, was enough. More than enough. It was the thing that no amount of money in an envelope could have bought, and the thing that a biscuit from a Sunday tin had given for free. It was the most valuable thing in the world. It had been there on Kestrel Lane all along. If this story moved you, even just a little, if you saw yourself in Rose's careful love, or in Nadia's fearless kindness, or even in Edward learning, slowly, to put the phone down and sit on the floor, then this story did what it was made to do. These are the stories that remind us what actually matters. Not the titles, not the numbers on a balance sheet, not the size of the coat or the car or the house. What matters is the door. Whether you open it, whether you stay. If you believe that too, then hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to a channel that is built on exactly this. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things without knowing they are extraordinary. Drop a comment and tell us. Who opened a door for you? Who was the person in your life who gave you the biscuit they didn't have to give? We want to hear it. Every story in the comments is someone else's reminder that kindness is real and it is still out there and it matters. And if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe. Turn on the bell. There are more stories coming, and every single one of them is about the thing that money cannot buy, and fear cannot take, and time cannot erase. Human connection. The door left open. The lamp still on. We will see you in the next one.